Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mayor Eric Pappenfuss. Thank you for joining us for another community conversation here on Facebook Live. We've got some wonderful guests lined up today to talk to you about policing reforms on both the national, state, and local levels. We're joined by U.S. Congressman Scott Perry from his office in D.C., State Senator John DeSanto from Harrisburg, and State Representative Patty Kim, as well as City Council Public Safety Chair Asha Green. And again, we're going to be talking about the various legislation that's moving through each of those bodies and is part of the national conversation on policing reform. We're also joined by Dr. Susan Sneath at the Harrisburg School District to give us a brief update on what's going on there. And we'll begin today, as always, with a series of announcements. So thank you for being here. I'm going to start with everyone's favorite topic, it seems, which is fireworks. And as many know, the nuisance of fireworks has been a real issue in Harrisburg and in other cities throughout Pennsylvania and indeed the nation. We are trying something unique in Pennsylvania, which is we are offering the community an opportunity for a controlled fireworks display. You can bring your fireworks to one of 4 parks in the city of Harrisburg on Friday, July 3rd. And the fire chief and the fire department will be at each of these different locations and will be there to make sure that the setting off of those fireworks will be done safely. It's a good opportunity for the community to partner with the fire department. And we're hoping that if people do have fireworks, they'll save them up, not set them off tonight or tomorrow or over the course of the week, but wait until July 3rd when we can do it safely and with supervision. It's a new idea. It was brought to me by a community group, All You Can Incorporated. I want to thank Ralph Rodriguez for it, and we're going to be getting the word out. You're going to see some flyers and social media activity. The 4 parks are Sunshine Park, which is right there on Cameron and Her, the playground up at 7th and Radnor, Harrisburg's Reservoir Park near the basketball courts, and over on the south side we're going to use the former sinkhole site, which is now a green space. Each of these 4 parks will be used by permission. This will be Friday, July 3rd, and the activity will take place between 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. So I hope people will come out and work with the fire department to get those fireworks off safely. We've also done something pretty interesting here at the City of Harrisburg. We've worked with the young professionals of color, and we've established a new GIS mapping initiative to try and really pinpoint where the fireworks are being used and what types of fireworks are being used. So if you are out and about and you hear a firework, you've got a couple different options. One option is to call 311 and say what you heard and when you heard it, and we will send that on to our GIS team. And another option is if you just go to the website, you can go directly to harrisburgpa.gov/fireworks, and you can see an interactive map where you can simply move your cursor over where you heard the firework, put down a marker, note the type of fireworks, and that will get plotted on the map. And again, this GIS mapping initiative will be shared with the fire department, and it will help us both in our education and enforcement efforts to sort of see what we can do to manage what is really a national issue here of fireworks going off at all times of day and night. It's a quality of life issue, and we hope that everyone will continue to work with us, and we thank you for your patience. 2 other updates. I wanted to let folks know there are some additional financial reform and relief efforts related to COVID-19 that we're putting forth. This past week, I introduced a resolution with council to establish a forward-looking trash credit program for businesses that were affected by the statewide shutdown. So if you had a small business, were forced to shut down for a period of time, we are offering a credit on your trash bill moving forward into the last quarter of this year. If you were shut down either in full or in part, you're eligible for this credit. There will be an opening for applications. You'll receive a letter in the mail, and you'll receive a credit on your bill for the final 4 months of the year, September, October, November, and December. So unlike our small business grant program, which was immediate, and this is something which I think businesses can look forward to as continuing relief as the year wears on and as more and more businesses try to get back back on their feet. So that's a positive thing. Also, this past week, Capital Region Water, our water authority, announced that it is going to be pushing back the deadline for the stormwater fee implementation from what was going to be July 1st to October 1st. And I want to thank Capital Region Water for doing this. This is something that we've been in discussions about now for several months, and it's very helpful. As, again, mostly businesses, commercial property owners, and others are trying to get back on their feet after this pandemic, the fact that we're going to delay the implementation of that fee gives everybody a little bit more time to recover, and that's good news there, too. Another small bit of good news is that coming up on July 4th, which is a Saturday, and as you know, we've extended our outdoor dining options, and we're going to be having some food options for people to enjoy, and we're going to be having fireworks outdoors with proper social distancing in Harrisburg. Parking will be free on July 4th, thanks to SP Plus, so just keep that in mind. If you're coming downtown, you can park at a meter without fear of a ticket on Saturday, July 4th. And then, as a final announcement, I wanted to let everyone know that City Hall will be reopening to the public in a modified and limited fashion, but we will be doing that the week of July 6th. So the Monday after the 4th of July holiday, City Hall will be reopening. Treasury will only be open one day a week, Wednesdays only, and that'll be from 9 to 2:30, but you will be able to enter the building. There'll be some safety protocols, and you'll be able to pay your bills in person or get your permit in person. On days the Treasury isn't open, you can continue to use the Treasury drop box to pay bills. And with those announcements, I want to turn things over now to Dr. Sneath with the Harrisburg School District. I note with great pride every time I turn on Channel 20 that our partnership with educational programming is continuing. But we wanted to get an update. It's been a few weeks since Superintendent Selmer has been on the show. And so welcome, Dr. Sneath. And can you tell us what's going on with the Harrisburg School District this summer?
Thanks so much for having me on this morning, Mayor. Good morning. We have been working really hard to sort of extend the offerings that we had in place in the spring. So we continued broadcasting, and that will end on Tuesday, June 30th, which leads us into some of our summer planning. The purpose is always enrichment. The purpose is always to expose our children to learning over the summer and to prevent regression over the summer. So we have a little something different for every age group of student. Kindergarten through second grade, we have special learning packets that are being mailed to all of our K1 and 2 students. There's a summer calendar with activities that families can do with their young children to keep their foundational literacy skills up and their numeracy, fluency up. Those are being mailed to the homes of all of our children, and it begins for the month of July. So you should be getting those packets at the end of next week, beginning of the week of July 6th. Grades 3 and 4, because of our targeted 21st century grant initiatives, grades 3 and 4 will receive literature that they can read over the summer, so summer reading. We will also have 3 weeks of direct instruction for 3 hours every day, following the rotational model that we followed in our extended day learning program throughout the school year. So we're able to add 3 more weeks of that over the summer. All of it is focused on mathematics, literacy, and of course, social emotional learning is in there as well. 5th through 8th grade, we have asynchronous math modules that have been created for our students specifically. So students will receive about 10 hours of mathematics instruction through the module that they can do outside of the time that they're working with teachers. In the area of ELA, though, we have English teachers who are going to work with our students in grades 5 through 8. So it'll be a 5-6 program, a 7-8 program. They'll be reading, they'll be doing literature circles, they'll be doing writing, speaking, discussion. So all of that is being prepared by our middle school teacher leaders. And then in the high school, we have credit recovery offerings for students who have to make up credits that they were unsuccessful in passing. But we also have enrichment opportunities for students who want to get ahead. We're partnering with Harrisburg University for some STEM camps. So we have a lot happening at the same time. The biggest thing that we were really focused on this summer was transition. We really wanted to have something special for our incoming kindergartners. We have something special planned for our fifth graders, fourth graders who are moving to fifth grade, and of course our eighth graders who are moving to ninth grade. So we have special initiatives happening in that way. And then lastly, we're planning to do a district-wide read aloud where different members of the school district will be reading a chapter a day, every day at a certain time. You can broadcast in or you can watch it online. We'll be streaming it through Facebook, our Harrisburg Facebook Live, as well as our YouTube channel. And we are picking we're selected. I know the first book that we're starting with is Wonder, which is just an amazing story and a great humanitarian story that might be really, it's a fun read aloud. It's a good read aloud. So you'll be seeing different people from the school district. I might have a day, Mr. Selmer might have a day, different principals, different teachers. So we really want to stay connected with our families throughout the summer. It's a long summer. And, throughout all of it, we'll be keeping people apprised of what's happening in the fall as soon as we have clear direction.
Well, thank you for those updates, and Wonder's a great choice. Maybe I could participate as well. I'd love to read a chapter. Okay, it's a that's a great book, and a real favorite. I know that it's been quite a time for everyone, but I know that there was a lot of emphasis placed on the distribution of computers to all the various age groups. And you mentioned both modules and packets that are going out. I mean, how has it gone, the distribution of technology, and do you feel like that, in addition to the broadcasting that we're seeing on Facebook and on Channel 20 and elsewhere, is it connecting?
So the first issue was the device distribution. So we started with our 9th through 10th graders, and 80% of our 9th through 10th graders did come to pick up devices. So we felt really connected with our students in 9th through 12th grade. We had a different sort of continuity of education plan specifically for them. We felt like we were able to carry out their instruction for the fourth quarter of the school year. Fifth through, well, we were also able in waves to distribute devices to all of our students in grades 3 through 8. What we found is that over time in the spring, the longer we got away from the beginning of the closing, we had fewer and fewer kids coming to pick up because they had questions about why they were picking up devices. And we kept trying to do the communication where we explained to families that we will be offering summer enrichment, and that's why they needed to come and pick up devices. And once that message got out, they were coming in droves. We did not get devices out to our K2. Really, we had a lot of feedback from our parents with younger children saying, we really don't even want online for our youngest children. They're kind of maxed out with that. So we really thought differently about the summer, and we think the mailing of the learning packet is probably the best thing to do for our younger children. Additionally, at all of our sites on Tuesday, all of our food distribution sites on Tuesday, we're continuing that partnership with WITF, and they've put together with various other generous people or companies, they put together learning packets, STEM packets. So each week we are sending home learning supplies, colored pencils and construction paper and all kinds of different things for learning at home. So we've really had so much support from the community to make sure that our kids are staying connected to their education throughout the closing and throughout the summer as well. The broadcasting too, just to give you an update on that, we were so pleased because we were monitoring the number of views on our Facebook Live of our broadcasting, we were averaging 4,000 views a day through our Facebook and YouTube, which was huge. So not only through our partnership with WITF, where we were really kind of attaching their programming to the learning that needed to happen for different groups of children, we were also filming our own teachers delivering literacy lessons and streaming those through your channel, Mayor. And that we had a lot of positive feedback about that kind of asynchronous learning. Kids were supposed to journal after they watched, and so we had a lot of positive feedback about that, especially for families who struggled to have internet access and things like that. So, you can see we're trying all different which ways to stay connected to our families in this remote situation, and we hope that we've been able to reach most. We've had a lot of supportive feedback about it.
Well, thank you very much for those updates, and we appreciate all of your efforts. They have made a difference, and they continue to make a difference. And as things become a little clearer where we're going in the fall with the back to school, we'll be sure to update everyone.
Yes, we'll be happy to come back on to talk about that when plans are finalized, for sure.
Great. Well, thank you for those updates, Dr. Sneath.
Happy 4th of July. Thank you so much for having me.
You got it. Thanks for being here. And we're going to turn now to really the topic of the day, which is police reform, and what can we expect to hopefully accomplish by working together both at the national, state, and local levels. That's the topic for today, and we want to start with U.S. Congressman Scott Perry, who's kind enough to join us from his office in D.C., where he may be called away at any moment to vote on the floor. Congressman Perry, I'm reading the news and following what's going on. It looks like the House passed a series of reform measures which did not have your support or the support of very many Republicans. And in the Senate, it looks like some Republican-sponsored reforms also weren't able to get enough bipartisan support to pass. So at home, it looks like, unfortunately, we're seeing a sort of partisan divide over these reforms. So I wanted to start with, on a positive note, where do you see the points of agreement? If we could start by focusing not on maybe where there's division, but where there's agreement, I think it might be helpful. So what do you think we could get done tomorrow if we focused on points of agreement?
Well, you're right, Mayor. And first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this forum. I think this is a fabulous opportunity for everybody to hear what's going on safely and from the comfort of wherever they are. Greetings from Washington, D.C. And you're absolutely right. It is very disappointing. The Senate bill, they couldn't get it out of the Senate. We did vote on the Senate on Senator Scott's bill in the House yesterday. Unfortunately, that failed. And then there was another bill by Representative Karen Bass as an alternative. That one did pass, and unfortunately the word from the Senate is that it will not even be taken up in the Senate. But during the course of the debate and the conversation, which we were all glued to yesterday, there are significant points of agreement, and it's such a shame that we can't just work well. And I guess maybe the good news is at this time, maybe we'll be compelled to put the things together that we do agree on and at least get those accomplished. I have talked to almost all of our local policing agencies, including Commissioner Carter and Harrisburg Police Department, about these proposals to make sure that, if you're not a police officer, you want to make sure you're not doing more harm than good, so to speak. But in particular, I think that the chokehold issue is something that we can find some agreement on, and we should be able to find agreement on de-escalation training. Again, a lot of points of agreement, but some of the subtleties and some of the particulars is where people take issue. On the cameras, on the body cameras, and quite honestly on how long that data is stored and how you pay for that and what it can be used for. Those those three things in particular are issues that I think have almost universal agreement, not only across the police forces, not only in South Central Pennsylvania in our congressional district, but across the country and in Washington, D.C. So I'm hopeful that if this impasse continues, and unfortunately I suspect it will, that the conversation doesn't get stalled, and we can focus on the things that both sides, and when I say both sides, it's Republicans and Democrats and House and Senate, because that's part of it that we agree with. One of the things that I think that is one of the things of major concern is the database for officers that have been involved in an altercation or may have been accused of misconduct or misuse of force or almost anything, depending on which bill you look at. And what we want to do, I think, is allow other law enforcement agencies to access that information, such that if some officer from some other state wants to come and work right here in our hometown, we might not know anything about that person other than what they tell us. And of course, current employment laws don't really allow a potential future employer to ask those very significant and important questions. And so we want to create, I think, a database where law enforcement can take a look at those things so that they're informed about who might be coming to them. But there's a concern in the one bill, it opens it up to anybody in the public. So if any officer has any issue whatsoever, let's just say they showed up late for work one day, maybe their wife was sick and they had to stay home with their children or something, and they were written up, for lack of a better phrase for that, that would then go into that database, which then would be accessible to the general public. And I don't think we have this problem in our area, but this is a problem that has occurred in probably more larger metropolitan areas, where when people know where the police live, then they threaten the police officers' family members. There's property destruction, to the point where oftentimes police officers move out of the jurisdiction where they're living. So those things are what and the details are important. What we don't want to do, I think, we have an opportunity here, and we have an opportunity to deal with some things at a federal level and inform both the state and local level of where we're headed, and provide some resources for de-escalation training and those type of things. But what I don't think we want to do is discourage the great police forces and the law enforcement agencies that we have. And with all that we see happening around the country, and you know, in every bushel of apples, there's likely to be one that, you know, one of us isn't going to want, you know, and that's the case in at many times. But we haven't really seen that in what I would characterize as the smaller police forces, which we have right here in South Central Pennsylvania. So we're blessed that we haven't really been mired with these kind of problems, but we don't want to create these problems either. And we don't want to disincentivize people who want to serve in that law enforcement, first responder capacity in their communities. And so that's why we have this impasse. And it is truly unfortunate that it has become almost wholly partisan. But with that, I do think that they're listening to the debate. I think there are some opportunities here, maybe on kind of like a first step, and maybe a more refined version that doesn't include some of these other things, to move forward. And I sure hope we take that opportunity. And that would be my report at this very moment. Anything could change here in Washington, D.C. in a matter of hours, but that's where we are at this moment, Mayor. And thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Just on a personal note, I hope we're able to find common ground, especially at this sort of critical juncture in time, with so much of a focus and so much of an interest. You started by mentioning three things: a banning of chokeholds, additional funding for de-escalation training, and support for body cameras. I think those are good examples of of places where we can find common ground, and all initiatives that, for instance, we believe in here in Harrisburg with the Harrisburg Police Department. Those are part of our general orders, and in fact, body cameras have only recently been rolled out, but are very much have very much been embraced by the police officers themselves. And I will say, when we started the conversation, there was apprehension about body cameras, and change oftentimes brings that about. But I think the benefits have become clear to everyone as we've moved forward, and we you know that. Yeah, to both sides. So, but let's talk about the database a little bit more if we could, because, and I'm going to give you my perspective on this as well. I feel we really do need such a database, and I think you're agreeing that we do, that maybe the issue is how public that data, whether it's used internally or whether it's public. I can just say, as somebody who, we've hired officers, and we've had to dismiss officers, and sometimes I have been shocked that officers that we thought we had handled in Harrisburg and were no longer with our department were suddenly hired somewhere else, and there isn't a great deal of communication right now, and this push for a database is something which really could make a difference. So can you talk about, so are you in favor of a database then, as long as it's just used internally?
Yes, and I think the president's executive order, by the way, aside from the legislation that is mired in this difference of opinion, the president's executive order creates that, and essentially does allow for and requires law enforcement to include those type of infractions, that record of potential issues with any particular officer, for other law enforcement agencies. And when I say law enforcement agencies, just to be clear, it's not just your local police. It would be any law enforcement agency, right up to the Department of Justice or the FBI or your local township police. And we want them to be able to see that record, because this is so critical. Lives potentially are on the line. And as you know, Mayor, when you hire somebody, you do have the current hiring restrictions about what kind of questions that you can ask. And oftentimes a person can present themselves on the face that they do very well, but then either in performance or maybe a prior record of mistakes or what have you. And nobody's perfect, so we're not trying to impugn the police, but there's sometimes when you're making split moment decisions that where life and death hangs in the balance, it just requires that level of acuity and professionalism and judgment, and we just demand to have that in our police forces. And so we want police and law enforcement agencies to be able to avail themselves to that information, but there are concerns that I think are legitimate and reasonable regarding opening that up to the general public. Yeah, look, there are folks that disagree with the police, even though they might have been doing something wrong, and the police are just trying to do their job. And if you imperil the police officers in that regard, obviously that's going to be an issue to be dealt with. Now, maybe there's some other way of kind of having your cake and eat it too, so to speak, but in this legislation, we just haven't found it yet. So maybe that's what could be refined, or maybe this would be the first step, and then we work towards some of those other transparency concerns and issues. But this is where we are right now.
Okay, thank you for that. And I noticed that another point of contention seems to be this issue of qualified immunity. Can you talk about your perspective on that?
Yes, I can, and I think it's important that everybody understands. So when you say qualified immunity, it doesn't mean that police officers or mayors or elected officials are immune from what's the word? Accountability, right? That's why it's called qualified. So to do your job, so that you're not spending your whole day in court defending yourself for every decision you make, that's why it's qualified. So we have a set of standards, we have a set of rules, and in the police case, as you know, Mayor, and you've already kind of alluded to, is there's a set of orders, so to speak. As long as you follow these requirements, these orders, whether it's the use of force or how you comport yourself, et cetera, as long as you fall within those parameters for your conduct, you're immune from these lawsuits, which would potentially question your every decision. And so that's the qualified immunity. Now, if you are outside, if you are operating and comporting yourself outside of those provisions, outside of those orders, as was the officer in the unfortunate murder of Mr. Floyd, then you are not immune. You are subject to both a civic prosecution and criminal prosecution, as you should be. And so the concern there is if you just get rid of that altogether, again, who in our community is going to want to spend their time trying to serve the community in law enforcement, knowing that they're going to spend most of their time in court answering for every single decision that they've ever made, and potentially lose their home, their livelihood, everything they've worked for. And so it is seen as really, really problematic, and we have not been able to come to terms with that. The general consensus, I think, for many people, and certainly I would tell you this to a person from every police department that I talked with, which was a great number of them at this point in our community, is without that qualified immunity to allow them to do their jobs, as long as they stay within the parameters, we won't be able to maintain a police force. It's just that people will not serve, and people that are serving now will leave, and people will be very, very reluctant to ever serve at all. And so that's that has become an impasse that is very, very difficult for us here in Congress.
Yeah, and thinking about that issue, I think you're sort of reinforcing why it is important on the local level that we have discussions like we're having in Harrisburg about reforming our use of force general orders, because it's the general order which sort of sets the parameters, which then could lead to the qualified immunity. And in Harrisburg, we've adopted a program called 8 Can't Wait, which is basically a discussion of sort of 8 guiding principles that many believe, based on data, would be good to adopt within use of force general orders throughout the country. We've even established an email in Harrisburg called 8cantwait@harrisburgpa.gov. That's the number 8 can't, CANTWAIT at harrisburgpa.gov, where we're encouraging people to do something pretty extraordinary, which is to go onto the harrisburgpa.gov website, where right on the homepage you can print out and read the general order, which governs the use of force. And then you can send your comments, and we're in the process of having a conversation about whether or not we'd like to see changes to that general order. I just mentioned that because that's part of the overarching conversation, which really gets at the issue of the qualified immunity. So I guess yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, police officers, just like you and I, serve our community, and we serve at the pleasure of our community, and we can't do the job adequately or effectively if we don't have community input into it and community buy-in into it. So I think that's a great initiative that you've incorporated.
Well, thank you, and that's ongoing, and we're going to get to some additional reforms that we're doing at the local level here shortly. But I guess as a final question for you on this topic, do you have plans moving forward to work perhaps in a bipartisan fashion to try and find the common ground so that we can get something done here, or are you afraid that maybe it's not possible? I'd like to see if we can end on a positive note.
Yeah. No, I sure hope it's possible. Like I said, I think we're at a critical moment where we have an opportunity to make some realistic changes that will make a difference. And I will tell you, I have the utmost respect for law enforcement. I always have, and I think they have a very difficult job. But it also, when I see the kind of things I saw on the film with the officer with his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck, the words just can't describe what I was thinking and feeling, and I don't understand why that had to happen. And I certainly can empathize with anyone in our community who has a fear. once that's happened, you don't get a second chance, right? And so you should not be fearful that the police are going to ever do something like that to you or your family member, your loved one, your community member. And so so we have an opportunity here, and I hope that we can get to some point. We had offered, as you know, Senator Scott has experienced, and I think he in his testimonial regarding the bill that I did vote for, he kind of enumerated some of these things that he himself has experienced, and we welcomed many amendments to the bill to try and find some way to because we want to do something. Unfortunately, they just weren't honored, and there weren't any, and so I hope that maybe with a little bit of cooling down, at least here legislatively, and maybe some of the egos that might be involved, that we can take what we have, and as you say, Mayor, let's take a look at the things that we do agree on, and I think there are many. And if you watched the debate yesterday, you would have seen that on both sides of the aisle. And if we can't get the whole thing, that's regrettable, I get it, but let's start with what we can get. And I'm certainly absolutely up for this. I co-sponsored Senator Scott's bills, just so you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that, and appreciate your being here. I understand you may need to leave at any moment, but it was good to have you.
I'm going to stay as long as I can.
If you can stick around, we'll have some questions from the public at the end, and appreciate that. Now, the national level is not the only level of government where this conversation is occurring, obviously. And I'd like to turn now to State Representative Patty Kim, because just this past week, a number of reforms passed the State House and have moved on to the Senate. And one of the sort of bedrock reforms that was passed does speak to this issue of the database. So maybe we could start there, Patty, because if it's not possible on the federal level, maybe it is certainly possible on the state level. And can you talk a little bit about what came out of the House this past week regarding to that?
Sure, Mayor. The bill that you're talking about is House Bill 1841 by Representative Reed Shaw. And like you just said, it would create a database run by the Municipal Police Officers Education and Training Commission. It would share employment records so municipalities can be informed during the hiring decisions. So for example, if I wanted to look into a police officer candidate, I could pull up the person's name from the database, and it could tell me things like why the officer was let go from a certain department. Before this bill came about, it wasn't required for police departments to disclose the employment situation with a certain police officer. And a lot of times police departments didn't divulge that information in fear of civil liability. So this bill would protect police departments. It would also show me records of all criminal charges filed against this person and any civil or ethical complaints. If you remember the case with Antoine Rose, that police officer who shot him had prior misconduct in his file. And many people in Pittsburgh believe that if we had this database, Antoine Rose would still be alive right now. So with this bill, it would also it would not exempt right to know requests for the information. But I think overall, this is really important. I've talked to police officers around this area, and they said that this should have happened a long time ago. And I believe that this is the first significant police reform bill that was passed in the last 40 years. And so I think this is definitely a good start. It's much needed during this time, and I believe that it could prevent police officers from being moved from one department to the next. And Mayor, I just wanted to expound a little bit about that. We talk about the bad apples all the time, and I understand that. I've been part of the media, and I've now been part of politics, and I get that there are bad apples. But what makes it hurtful for the community is that the police departments or the government allows the bad apples to thrive. And that's where things get messy. As you know, that the Me Too movement happened recently, and it hit government. And in order for us to clean out the system, so to speak, we've had to make some changes within my caucus, which would require, more ethics training. There are things that we have to do differently, and I'm okay with that. Even though I'm not considered a bad apple, I've not done anything in that category, but I'm willing to be uncomfortable and inconvenienced to restore the integrity of my body so that I can operate and do well and help people and do my job well. So, the police department has lost their integrity as a whole, and I get it. Not everybody's the same and not everybody operates the same way, but changes need to happen. Transparency and accountability need to happen so that our citizens feel safe from police officers and the department in general. So again, this was a good first step, but I believe we need to have more police reform in the near future.
Thank you for addressing that. And so this database, I think, is much needed. I've said I think it would be very helpful for Harrisburg and other agencies to have. So, but this would only work on the state level, which is why it would be helpful to have a national bill as well. It sounds like the issue of that Congressman Perry was talking about is addressed in the bill in that on the one hand, it is for law enforcement use, but it is subject to right to know. And so therefore there is a process by which the public can gain access to this information. Do you want to talk to that a little bit? To me, that sounds like a fair balance. It's a use which has a public component, but were there concerns expressed by your colleagues, similar to what Congressman Perry brought up?
I did not hear that on the floor debate. A lot of these bills are moving quickly because we know that the time is now and there is a sense of urgency. The thing that I think, the way I interpret the bill is that the things on the person's records are major infractions, like, excessive force, theft, harassment, discrimination, sexual abuse, sexual misconduct, major issues. It's not like, took too much time off, was late, after coming from lunch. I don't think those minor things will be on the record, but things that, are, of criminal nature. So I think those things are important for the community to know, especially if we want to be able to trust our police departments. Mayor.
Sure. And there's definite public value in knowing that, and maybe that's the line that can be drawn that would give both sides comfort in moving such a bill forward. Another reform that came from the House this past week has to do with law enforcement officers getting evaluated for PTSD after a lethal use of force incident. Can you talk to that and why you felt that was important?
Sure. So House Bill 1910 was sponsored by Dan Williams of Chester County, great person. And this bill now focuses on the health and well-being of police officers, which, my brother-in-law was a former DC police officer. I know how difficult that job is and the balance they have to make, or in family and the mental health. So if a police officer undergoes or experiences certain circumstances, they would be required to have a mental checkup. And if they are diagnosed with PTSD, they would have to take a break and would not be allowed to serve on the streets until they get an evaluation and a pass from a doctor. So that's really important, but it also goes a little bit further. There's also training in terms of cultural training, awareness, implicit bias every other year for police officers. And then there's an annual training for the use of force, including deadly force, de-escalation, and harm reduction techniques. So I think that's just a good, well-rounded training to help police officers stay on top of education and be able to interact with all different types of people within their jurisdiction. And then the last part of it would be to recognize the signs of child abuse when they are out and about and be able to identify some of the signs. So that's really important as well. So that will go to the Senate, and we'll see if they pass that. But I've heard from my colleagues on the Senate side that they're ready ready to look at this and be supportive.
Great. Yes. Look, I think all those things are very good. Those training initiatives, whether it's implicit bias or training for use of force, are things which we do in Harrisburg. The psychological evaluation after a deadly or use of force incident is something that we also believe in. But this bill will sort of standardize that across the Commonwealth, and I think that's a good thing. One comment from from local officials, which you may get, is that will there be resources that will come along with the bill? One of the issues with training that is sort of constant for Harrisburg is that when you send people to training, you have to then fill those positions on the street. It costs a fair bit in overtime, and we want to do more and more training, but there's a real cost to it. Do you think we can find common ground to help fund these trainings on the local level?
Yeah, that is definitely a concern. And the Municipal Police Officer Training and Education Commission are both a point people or point organization for both these bills, and they would receive the resources needed to do these trainings and create the database. Also, Mayor, I just wanted to also commend your police department. I know that you were accredited, right, from the Chief of Police Association. That's correct, right?
Yep.
So, if we had, there's only about 118 police departments actually accredited, and they go through all of this training. Chokeholds are banned. If you're accredited, you're not allowed to use that. And we are only 118 out of, I think, 1,100 local law enforcement agencies that are accredited. And a lot of small boroughs say that it's about finances. So I'm just bringing this up. I know that finances are an issue, but I appreciate the Harrisburg Police Department for going through all of the rigorous trainings to get accredited and have the top of the line education to keep our cops, on top of things. So thank you, Mayor, for that.
Yes, thank you. We very much are accredited, and again, what we're talking about here is how can we standardize these really best practices throughout the Commonwealth. You may have a situation where Harrisburg is doing things right, but perhaps other surrounding municipalities don't have the same standards and same levels, and that's where I think it's good to look for standardizing across agencies. Before we turn to Senator DeSanto and we take a look at where these reforms may be going in the Senate, are there any other aspects of the House reform measures that you'd like to point out or share with the public this morning?
Sure. I think that we've hit a tipping point, and I think that just in terms of general criminal justice reform is badly needed. I think our prisons are too crowded, and people are staying there too long for minor crimes. And I hope that we can continue this momentum and seeing the humanity in all people, Black and Brown people, to make sure that we're all treated well. So yeah, there are many bills. It'd probably be another show, Mayor. But I hope this is the starting point for equality.
Hey, Mayor, I apologize profusely and sincerely, but I've got to go vote. So I hate to bail out on you, but I really appreciate you offering the opportunity, and I just think it's a wonderful forum that you have, program, et cetera. So, but sorry, I've got to run. Thank you very much.
Yep. Understand. Thank you, and we'll have you back again, and keep up the fight. Let's get some things done. Thank you.
Great. Looking forward to it.
Okay. With that, we're going to turn to Senator John DeSanto. And Senator, I know there is a lot going on. Patty just brought up a couple bills that have passed the House and have come your way to the Senate. I want to get your thoughts on those. But I also noted that there is a Senate bill which is dealing with the issue of use of force reporting. and trying to sort of mandate how those reports make their way to the public, numbers of and percentages of incidents. And I bring that up in part because that is something which we're also doing on the local level, and we'll get to OSHA Green in a minute. But one of our signature reforms is going to have to do with this issue of reporting. So do you want to start with the issue of reporting, and then maybe talk a little bit about your perspective from the Senate? And welcome.
Well, thank you, Mayor. I appreciate you inviting me to be part of the Facebook conversation. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with the other panel members. Before I talk about the Senate, I did want to commend you and City Council for working to establish good policing practices with the Harrisburg Bureau of Police, and to Chief Carter and his team for the work they do every day in keeping the city residents safe. And I think it's a testament that Harrisburg has not experienced most of the recent violence and destruction of property witnessed in some of the other communities, and that the city, as other speakers, especially Patty pointed out, has been proactive with the policies to improve the public trust and strengthen that. I'm proud to represent the city, as I've gotten to know you and work as a partner with you and Chief Carter and Deputy Chief Moody. I appreciate and wanted to thank you for meeting with me earlier this week when we did, in fact, review the House bills and the Senate bills I'll talk about shortly to get your perspective. I want to make sure I'm making the right decisions up there in the Senate. The Senate's taking, in my view, a deliberate and thoughtful approach to the policing reform. As we all know, there's been a national outrage with Mr. Floyd, dying under the knees of that police officer, and it was clearly inappropriate. And we need to have police reform on some levels, ensuring accountability, equality in law enforcement. And all these things elicit strong and passionate, varied responses. But it's interesting to note that although we do have a lot of strong and passionate voices on the Senate, in the last 2 weeks, we've actually been working fairly well together across the aisle and different interest groups. And it's been a little refreshing, honestly, that we are generally in sync. To that end, I'm sure you know that the Senate Law and Justice Committee and the Senate Judiciary Committees held 2 days of hearings, and we heard from the Pennsylvania State Police, including the Deputy Commissioner of Administration, Municipal Police Officers Education and Training Commission, the Use of Force Unit, the Equality Inclusion Office, National Association of Black Law Enforcement Officers, as well as the FOP, the Pennsylvania State Troopers Association, NAACP, ACLU. All those groups testified and had good input to the discussion and help us try to arrive to a clear consensus that requires the time and continued dialogue to develop this legislation. So to try to get to your question, I know we're running out of time here. The Senate has advanced Senate Bill 459, which provides for the law enforcement agency for the record keeping and reporting requirements regarding the use of force and deadly force by law enforcement. It also requires a statewide report to be compiled annually on the use of force incidents. And I think it's important that we're doing this. I think it's important for everybody on the call to understand that, we're looking at it on the state level. Hopefully Congressman Perry and his colleagues can get a more national, but it's also at the local level within each police department is looking at this. We also approved Senate Bill 1205, which prohibits the use of chokeholds, but Harrisburg currently, and a lot of our local departments are not doing that. But to Patty's point earlier, there's not many of the departments across the state that are doing that. Hopefully this will encourage everybody to, bring up to their the standards that MOPEC has and so on. I know we're running out of time, but I did want to also, we've hit a lot of the issues on policing, but I did want to note that my recent passage of Senate Bill 637, which prohibits licensing boards from denying applicants a professional or occupational license based on old or irrelevant criminal records. I think this ties right into policing reform, because there's so many people out there that do something when they're young and dumb, and these convictions can follow them for their life and prevent them from getting licenses, and that prevents them having a license to work, to get re-enter the community, and not end up in law enforcement's clutches. And I also think it's important to note, you talked a little bit about funding. I really think we are going to have some COVID funding, and my concern is really to try to not so much defund the police department, as we spoke about in our meeting, but we need to fund mental health resources, because the way we have re-envisioned our mental health program within the state has moved a lot of people with serious mental health issues into our community. And unfortunately, the police are now dealing with that. And when you talk with the Warden Brian over at Dauphin County, the police have nowhere to take these people other than to prison. And it's a vicious cycle. And I really think we're going to make real progress, hopefully working with Patty's across the building there, that we can re-energize our mental health funding and take this burden that is not rightfully on the police. It's wrongfully on the police. The police aren't trained to deal with mental health people. And that leads to a lot of these other issues we're talking about. So I know we're running short on time. I was talking fast.
No, thank you, Seth. Both the bills you mentioned, I think, are good ones. The Senate Bill 459 and 1205. Again, dealing with the need for reporting and the need for reforming use of force policies. These are things that we're doing at the local level, and we strongly support. And I think you're right on with needing more resources towards mental health. We're looking at, as a city, to try and put more of our own resources into establishing maybe an Office of Mental Health that deals with, that provides social workers and others and access to partner with the police department, so that we don't essentially criminalize mental health and all that goes along with that. And we'll have further discussions on that. It sounds like we're moving towards perhaps more bipartisan agreement here at the state level than we're seeing on the federal level. But can you talk about your thoughts on the bills that Patty referenced that are leaving the House and heading over to the Senate?
Yeah, absolutely. The Senate anticipated those being passed. I think we're going to look favorably on them. We're in session next week, and I think it's our intent to move those. And when you and Chief Carter and Deputy Chief Moody and I met, we went through those bills point by point, and we really did not, anybody in the group, have serious contentions with it, although we wanted to make sure that, police officers' privacy was protected in the right way. And, as you recall, we talked about it, the difference between advisory boards and review boards. But I think, we're at a point in time where we can make some improvements to police operations, and also, I think, restore some of the concern the public has with the police department. And, and I keep saying this because this is hugely important. I'm not interested in defunding the police. I'm interested in funding the mental health issues that need to be addressed, because the police take so much of that time that they're really not trained for, they're not set up for. And, you talked about body cameras. I don't need to talk to you about the budget pressures that are put on with technology and new equipment and everything all the time that officers need just to do their job. And I can't help but mention when we toured the Dauphin County Prison with a number of community leaders a few months ago before COVID, it was obvious. You looked at some people in prison there and you had a sense that maybe they did belong there just based on their behavior, but there was other people there that clearly should not be there. They needed to be in another kind of environment where they were getting professional help. And I think that's a component we need to look at.
Thank you, Senator. I agree. And if you'd like to partner with the City of Harrisburg on a pilot program to help fund mental health initiatives, we are there and ready to go at any time. Yeah.
With you, I think we can, and I'd be happy to explore that.
That sounds
That
great.
sounds great.
We're going to turn now to our final guest, Councilwoman Public Safety Chair Asha Green. And Asha is here to talk about the new legislation that was just introduced into Harrisburg City Council this past Tuesday, which is going to be coming up for its first discussion this coming Tuesday at the work session for City Council. So we certainly hope people will Zoom in and become a part of that. Councilwoman Green, can you talk a little bit about the two resolutions and the bill which have been introduced?
Good afternoon, Mayor Pappan-Pugh. Thank you for having us all here today. Thank you for the forum. The first resolution that I'll be speaking about is Resolution 51, which is it's about use of force reporting for Harrisburg City police officers. It establishes a timeline for use of force to be reported. It requires reporting to be done on a consistent basis so they can be made available to the public. It'll capture things such as the type of force used, the number and percentage of incidents, the breakdown of use of force by police district. All these things are important to create transparency in our use of force and in our policing in the city of Harrisburg. I think it's important because as a community, as a world now, we have technology at our fingertips, but we need to make for sure we're able to access the data so that our communities can be well informed, so that they can advocate for themselves if they feel that use of force is excessive, or if things need to be changed, or if policies need to be revisited. But without the information, it doesn't allow the community to make an informed decision. It also doesn't allow the community to be able to advocate for themselves. So it's important for us to get this data out there to create the transparency so that everyone knows what's going on, so that we know about all the great work also being done in the city of Harrisburg by the police officers, and that it doesn't create a stigma because sometimes you hear about different things that that are rumored to be going on, but by having it documented on paper, we can have the facts available to all the citizens. And that's Resolution 51.
Yeah, let me just jump in and say, yeah, I think this is a great step. I think it's very similar to what Senator DeSanto was talking about with Senate Bill 459, which I also hope gets adopted on the state level. And just so the public understands, when Harrisburg police officers use force, they are required under the general order to file a use of force report. And then that report is something which is then reviewed and sometimes leads to retraining or discipline, but it's always an internal matter. The aspect of the reporting which here really can shine a light on and help sort of inform the community has to do with whether or not we're now going to have a reporting requirement both on the state level and on the local level to really determine how much force is being used, when it's being used, where it's being used, and why it's being used. And I think that's a terrific reform. So people can come out and talk about that resolution, which will be heard this coming Tuesday. The other signature component has to do with establishing a new advisory board. So let's talk about that.
Yes, Bill 8 would create a Citizens Law Enforcement Advisory Committee with the city of Harrisburg. And I think this bill really lends to the picture of community policing. It's really getting our community involved in the policing process from the beginning, from creating policies, reviewing policies, making recommendations to our police department, our council, our mayor on our policing practices and how it's affecting the community, how it's relating to the community. I think that some of the things we've put in this bill will help to ensure that the residents of the city of Harrisburg are truly invested in bettering our community policing, our police department, and our city as a whole. One of the components is, the members have to live in Harrisburg for a minimum of 3 years before being appointed. that really ensures that we have true citizens of the city of Harrisburg, people who have taken the time, invested years in the city, at least lived here. This will allow us to have people on the board who have a better understanding of the city of Harrisburg. And I think that by creating this committee, we keep the conversation continuously moving forward. We have people who are focusing on policing in the city of Harrisburg and establishing those relationships. So it doesn't allow the conversation to die off, which is something that unfortunately happens. And that, it's the spark, it's the excitement, it's the initial reforms, and then we don't see the momentum afterwards. And I think creating this advisory board will help to keep the momentum going, because policing isn't stagnant, because it doesn't happen in a vacuum. So as our technology increases, as our communities evolve, our policing has to evolve too, to match our communities. And by having an advisory board, we allow our policing to continuously evolve with our community's input.
Yes.
Mayor?
Yes, go ahead, Senator. Yep.
I'm sorry, but I have another call at 1:15 that I need
Understood.
to take. So I just wanted to thank you for having me. And if anybody has any further questions, please contact me at senatordesanto.com, and we'll be happy to address them. All right.
Yes, thank you, Senator. Thanks for staying, and we'll, if we get other questions through Facebook Live, we will forward them on to you. We appreciate your time.
Have a nice weekend. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Councilwoman Green, back to you. A couple other highlights of the bill. Not only do people have to be city residents, but they have to represent the various policing districts of the city. There's a requirement that some of the appointees have social service backgrounds, that all of the appointees have some degree of training, whether it's a ride-along or other understanding of the police department. All good things. It's a 7-member board. Initially, 4 would be appointed by council, 3 would be appointed by the mayor. But one of the criticisms I've heard already coming up is that it's not a review board; it's an advisory board, and so we should talk a little bit about that right now. You talk about the fact that it's going to keep the conversation going. And one of the things that I've stressed is it has almost as much power as it wants, in the sense that it can hold elected officials responsible. It will be issuing reports. It will be it will have the bully pulpit of its office to keep the conversation going, as you're saying. So I see that as a powerful next step that we don't currently have in Harrisburg. But how do you address the issue of advisory versus review?
Thank you, Mayor Papenfuse. One of the biggest things is that this isn't the end all be all. This is a conversation. This is supposed to be continuously evolving. And I think at this current time, a review board isn't what we need. We need to start with an advisory committee. And in the future, we find, and the advisory committee recommends that we have a review board, that's something that we look into in the future. I don't want to get caught up in details of advisory versus review and then nothing comes about, which is something that we've seen happen in the past. So I think it's important to get these first steps started and then continue to evolve from there. The board will have a lot of powers. One, as you said, by holding public officials accountable. I think by informing the community about the different policies, different things that are going on. I think that's very important. As we've seen in the age of technology, getting the information out there can make a big change. If it wasn't for the video by a bystander, Mr. Floyd's death may have went undocumented. In the sense of, we saw the report and we saw what it said versus what we saw on the video. And that really made a big difference. So by our advisory committee being able to get the information out there to inform the community, to inform the police department of what's going on in the community as well, and having that constant flow of information, we're able to continuously progress and hold ourselves accountable.
Thank you. I do see it as an important step in that direction, and something that can be built upon as we move forward. And I share your desire to get something passed now and not to lose the momentum that has been created by this moment. But that said, we are interested in public comment, and we are interested in the views of the public. One of the ways is to Zoom in on Tuesday for this initial conversation. This will not be the only conversation. So would you like to talk a little bit about your vision of the public engagement process moving forward before this bill would eventually be passed and become a law?
Yes. So our first public conversation will happen this Tuesday at the work session, but then we're looking to host virtual town halls throughout the summer. So that when we come back from hiatus, we've had the discussion with the public. We've had the different opinions from different groups, from different council members, different levels of government, and we can move forward with making any amendments that might be needed and getting this passed and on the books. So I think over the summer, we'll be able to keep the conversation going. We'll be able to get the input that we need so that when we come back from hiatus, it's not a large amount of time before we're able to get this passed. So we'll be having virtual town halls. We'll be working with community organizations to get input from their constituents. And we might be attending some more Facebook Live sessions. We'll get it out any way we can. We'll look to, I've been getting lots of emails from people, so I'll make for sure all those comments are documented and sent over to the city clerk so that we can make for sure those opinions are counted as well. And we'll put it all together and see what's needed to get this passed.
Well, thank you, Councilwoman Green. I think one of the really positive, inspiring things that has come out of this current crisis has been the level of engagement and the interest from the citizenry in seeing change, and we're seeing that on the city level. I know our representative and senator are seeing it on the state level, and it's on the federal level as well. So hopefully, we will ride this tide of civic engagement to a conclusion which is going to result in really substantive reforms that are going to make a difference in people's lives. So thank you, and we're now going to turn to Momin, and I imagine there's perhaps quite a lot of interest online, but
Yes.
What do you have for us, Momin?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. We're getting several questions, and we won't be able to get to all of them, but we are collecting those questions and compiling them and responding, as soon as possible as well. But the ones that we can get to, just along this topic, we'll take this to Councilwoman Green. You discussed Bill 8 and working with the community. Teresa is asking about unarmed community officers. Is the city of Harrisburg looking at unarmed community officers who would liaise with residents of all areas within our city?
That's something that I haven't personally discussed, but it's something that I would like to look into to ensure that we have all of the support system that we need when we approach any situation. So that's something that I'd like to look into, but at the current moment, it's not something I've discussed.
I will say that is something that I have discussed with leadership, and I think there's a real opportunity for that. And I will have future conversations with Councilwoman Green and City Council, but I would see the possibility for that in next year's budget.
Okay. And along those same lines, another question for Councilwoman Green. This and other matters are being discussed at the upcoming work session. How can the public provide their feedback on that legislation?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, Moment?
Just regarding public feedback on the legislation that will be discussed at the upcoming work session, what's the best ways to for the public to be able to do that?
Well, I believe we'll be able to have live interaction during the work session, so they can make their comments known right there at the work session and get feedback immediately if available. They can also send me an email. My email is on the city website. I try to respond to emails in a timely manner. I try to make sure all emails also get forwarded to the city clerk so that they go into record. So those are the two best ways that I know of. I don't know if the mayor has any other input.
Yeah, I can give a few others. The email address to be on the agenda to speak at the work session on Tuesday is publiccomment@harrisburgpa.gov. So you can email and not only make your comments known in writing, but you can also participate in the Zoom session. Well, you can have your comments read. Another way that you can do is by calling our 311 non-emergency number, and our 311 operators will be happy to take down the information. And remember that City Hall will be reopening to the public in a limited capacity on July 6th. So you can also come in person and leave your comments in that manner.
Okay. The next question is for Representative Kim, but I do first want to remind everyone that yes, public comment at harrisburgpa.gov, and those will be read into the record during the work session. And the public can tune in to youtube.com/WHBG20 to watch the work session live and provide their comments via email during or after that as well. Next question is for Representative Kim. Rach is asking regarding training, police officer training. What's the evidence that training actually changes officer behavior?
So I cannot recite any studies right now in terms of training, but I think in general, having people talk about implicit bias always brings the idea forward. For example, I read and watched the author of White Fragility, which I recommend to a lot of people, where it's just a way to check yourself. I can say to myself that, I'm not racist. I believe that, everybody's equal. But then sometimes when you have certain thoughts that come in, it's really good to check yourself. And I think this training just is a reminder of that. And also for cultural awareness, we always have our, subjective implicit bias towards different people. So it's really important just to have these reminders when you work in a diverse jurisdiction, or if your district is suburbanized and you have people coming in, different people coming in. I think it's really important just at a human nature in terms of the way we look at different people. And police officers, I know, have a very difficult job. They are constantly encountering people at people's lowest moments in life. And when you see that day after day, especially if you're on night shift and you're just seeing people, that you become jaded and you start to harden. And I have to check myself as well. I work with a lot of people who are impoverished, who I am interacting when they are in their worst moments. And we have to stay fresh. We have to stay compassionate and empathetic in order for us to do our jobs well. So I am in support of these trainings. I think it's important. I think it's important for a lot of people to have these things, especially when we are interacting with the diverse community. Thanks for that question.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'll just add that I know that the police officers themselves really believe in training, that's something that we're constantly doing in Harrisburg. They're signing up constantly for all the various trainings that are available. You can see that in the accredited agencies. You can also see it in the leadership of the Harrisburg Police Department. One thing that we've done over the past several years is really invest more and more resources into training, to the point where our training budget now is about 5-6 times what it was just a few years ago, and we'd like to continue to increase it. So training has been embraced by the department, and I think that's proof that it's both wanted and needed.
All right, thank you. I believe we have time for just one more question, and I'll direct that to Representative Kim. This is regarding the database history that you had mentioned. How far would the history go? When something is on there, would it always be there?
Sorry, I just had to mute myself. So, you know what? I have to check on that. I think police departments have all those records. They just have to be able to disclose them. So I think it's going to be the span of the police officer's career, but I have to double check on that. I know in terms of the starting point of their background.
Yeah, and I would say some things like crimes and other things would stay the course of time and be there to be reported on, whereas minor infractions, which is not really what we're talking about here, sometimes those tend to get expunged after a certain period of time. The real goal here is to weed out the relevant factors that could influence a department's decision on whether or not this is the right person to be hired for law enforcement. And I don't think there's a statute of limitations on those types of questions. But we'll research that and get back to you with the language of the bill. And I think that's all for today. So thank you, Momin, for moderating those questions. Thank you, everybody, for watching another really interesting conversation about reform on all the different levels of government. And now it's up to everyone that you've heard from today to sort of get back to work, roll up our sleeves, and get these things done. There's a lot of work to be done, and there's a lot of momentum, and I hope we can seize the moment collectively. Thank you all for watching. We appreciate you joining us for another community conversation here on Facebook Live this Friday and every Friday at noon. And until next week, I'm Mayor Eric Papenfuse saying thanks for watching. Stay safe.